So, Chapter 13 for A2 Biology will be focusing on photosynthesis, which is a rather difficult chapter on its own. But if you did not have much difficulty in Chapter 12, Respiration, I don't think you'll have much difficulty in photosynthesis, because it is still under the field of biochemistry. So without wasting any time, let's just dive right into it. Even if you've not done O-level biology, you sort of have an idea of what photosynthesis is all about. Photosynthesis is this process that happens in mostly plants, but there are also other organisms that can do photosynthesis. Certain types of bacteria, algae, certain types of phytoplanktons can also carry out photosynthesis. It's not exclusively a plant thing, but as you can see here, I'm just drawing out a plant and just part of the leaf. And when the leaf absorbs light, carbon dioxide, and also water, they are able to synthesize organic molecules. Examples of organic molecules will be glucose, C6H12O6. Now, one very important thing about photosynthesis is it also produces oxygen. However, in photosynthesis, oxygen is referred to as a waste product. If a question asks you, they usually wouldn't, but if they do ask you what is the purpose of photosynthesis, you must say that the purpose of photosynthesis is to produce organic molecules. It is not to produce oxygen, by the way. It just so happens that oxygen is produced as a byproduct or a waste product. So you have to be a little bit careful over there when you're talking about photosynthesis. The formula for photosynthesis usually is given in the exam as well, is where 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water are in the presence of light and chlorophyll, and it will produce C6H12O6, which is glucose, together with 6 molecules of oxygen, which is the waste product. If you study this in O levels, this was sort of the minimum that you had to know. In A levels, however, it's going to be a little bit of a nightmare. So let's get right down into it. You see, this is just an introduction to the A-level part of photosynthesis. I don't need you to memorize this part yet. I just need you to understand. I just need you to know what we will be talking about in the future videos. Photosynthesis is actually divided into two processes, or two sections: the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. You must understand that photosynthesis requires these two processes to happen. Usually we will talk about light-dependent reaction first, followed by light-independent reaction, where light-dependent reaction requires light. That means it's depending on light, and light-independent reaction does not depend on light. When I was studying this many years ago, light-dependent reaction was just called light reaction, and light-independent reaction was called dark reaction. So it was extremely confusing because it made us assume that one happens during the day and what happens during the night. No, what it just means is the light-dependent reaction needs light for it to happen, and the light-independent reaction does not. But both of them are under the process of photosynthesis. You see, in the light-dependent reaction, the light must be absorbed by something known as photosynthetic pigments. Examples of these pigments are chlorophyll, and something pretty spectacular happens over here. Using light energy, or harnessing the light energy, it will then be able to convert that light energy into something called ATP. I need you to understand this, that this is not respiration. You see, ATP can be produced through the process of respiration. Yes, we studied that in chapter 12. But in photosynthesis, ATP can also be produced directly from light energy. How that happens, we will talk about that later. Don't worry about that. So ATP is produced by converting light energy, by chlorophyll, or by these photosynthetic pigments converting light energy into chemical energy. All right. And by you harnessing the light energy, hydrogen atoms will also be produced. Where they come from, again, don't worry. We are going to go into the detail of that in future videos. I just need you to pay attention to the basic stuff of what's happening. In the light-dependent reaction also, water will absorb light, and in the presence of the light, the water will break down. This is called photolysis, where photo means light, lysis means breakdown. So water is broken down in the presence of light, and it will produce hydrogen ion, electrons, and oxygen. That is where the oxygen is coming from. And this is very important for you to be aware of. Sometimes in A levels, they may ask you the question, how is oxygen produced during photosynthesis? And then you just have to say, oxygen is produced through the photolysis of water. But again, we are going to look at them in detail in later videos. So why do these two things need to happen? Or more importantly, why must ATP and hydrogen be produced? Because here is where something very important happens. You see, the ATP will first enter the light independent reaction because it's required in the next part. The hydrogen, again, remember in respiration, hydrogen atoms are dum-dums. They don't know where to go. So when we studied respiration, how does the hydrogen know where to go? Well, they use the help of carriers like NADs and FADs, right? Same thing happens over here as well. A carrier will come over and carry the hydrogen atoms. And when the carrier receives the hydrogen atoms, the carrier is said to be reduced. So we call it a reduced carrier. Some students will ask, is the name of the carrier the same? Is it NADs and FADs? No, the name of the carrier is slightly different. We will talk about that later too. So once the carrier becomes reduced, what will happen is it will carry the hydrogen atom into the light independent reaction. So what exactly is the light independent reaction all about? In the light independent reaction, you have these molecules of carbon dioxide. I want you to see what needs to happen to the carbon dioxide. Well, as you can see there, I'm just drawing out a molecule of glucose. So what needs to happen here is those molecules of carbon dioxide need to be joined together. Therefore, something called the formation of carbon-carbon bonds need to happen. That means the carbons need to be attached to each other. However, to attach the carbon to each other, that process requires ATP. That is why the ATP is needed. The ATP is needed so that the light independent reaction can happen. But if you look at carbon dioxide, it's CO2. When you look at the glucose, there is not just carbon-carbon bonds, there's also carbon-hydrogen bonds. Where is the hydrogen going to come from to make the glucose? You guessed it, it has to come from the reduced carriers, where they will allow the formation of carbon-hydrogen bonds. So the reduced carriers over there, remember, they are carrying the hydrogen. They will undergo oxidation. And when they undergo oxidation, they release the hydrogen. The hydrogen is used in the light-independent reaction. And the carrier just goes back and carries more hydrogen atoms from the light-dependent reaction anyway. Now, I need you to understand that this is not the exact process of the light-dependent reaction and light-independent reaction. This is just a mere introduction to the process. So the take-home message that I need for you here is to understand that photosynthesis is divided into the light-dependent reaction and light-independent reaction. In the light-dependent reaction, we want light energy to be harnessed so that ATP can be made and also get some hydrogen atoms. Photolysis of water also needs to happen. In the light independent reaction, the ATP and the hydrogen that we have obtained earlier is used to help in the formation of carbon-carbon bonds and carbon-hydrogen bonds so that an organic molecule such as glucose can be synthesized. So that's just the first introduction to this. And of course, we are going to look at the detail in the later videos.